So first of all, hi everyone, and welcome to this our very first guest session. I'm super happy to be here. You might be wondering what our guest sessions are, right? We are putting together a series of open and thing that I really love, free events, as an opportunity to connect with industry colleagues and talk about topics that we as designers care about and want to learn from others and just chat about it, right? So we want to achieve with SCAD sessions to open the space to understand some of the problems designers face and find solutions as a community, as an industry, or equally discover some wins that are worth promoting and talk about. This event of inclusive design is the first one, as you noticed, and we are very excited to continue with more events very soon. So stay tuned. This is not the last one. This is just the first. So I will give you over here. You are being wondering also, who am I, right? So hi again. My name is Leishi Curbelo. I use she and her pronouns. I'm a Latina woman in my 30s with short brown hair and glasses. I'm wearing a gray shirt with the sketch logo, just like Superman, on my chest, and I'm sitting in front of my computer and an hotel in Paris, France. With me today, I have the opportunity to share the space with two extremely great colleagues. But first, let's talk about the agenda. So today, we will be talking about inclusive design with Dr. Shadeequa, most well-known D. Miller. But also, we will have a talk about inclusive research with Sarrah Solomon. And then we will have a small panel with some questions that everyone I know that will be really handy for each designer over here in the audience. Just be aware, people, this event has been recorded and this will be available for everyone after the event. So please welcome Sarrah Solomon. So Sarrah is a UX designer for Oracle. She's a lifelong learner with a passion for uplifting and amplifying the voices of representing community. Welcome, Sarrah, to SCAD Sessions.
Hi, Laishi. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarrah Solomon. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Sudanese American woman in my 20s wearing a beige hijab or headscarf and a maroonish brown shirt. I'm sitting in front of my laptop in my room in Los Angeles, California.
Welcome, Sarrah. I'm super happy to just share mics with you. Over here. So also with me today, another amazing designer, Dr. Shadeequa D. Miller from Visa. D leads a global and cross-functional initiative for embedding inclusive and equitable design practices and standards that help deliver products, services, and commerce experience that uplift everyone everywhere. She's also a product manager leading product strategy on the inclusive client partnerships team and partnering with other product managers on developing inclusive products, services, and experiences. D is an advocate for community-based design in addressing complex social problems and is known for her unique ability to help organizations improve their engagement for vulnerable, unserved, and unvested communities. Welcome, D, to SCAD Sessions.
Hi, thank you so much, Lacey, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Dee Miller. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a dark-skinned Black cis woman. I'm here sitting with a white shirt, polka dots, pink polka dots, and some flowers. And I'm sitting in front of my computer in my house based in Austin, Texas.
Thank you so much, Dee. Please don't go because actually we will start with you. Without further ado, I would love to hear from Dee. What is inclusive design and what are the best practices? So Dee, enlighten us.
Thank you so much, Lacey. So what is inclusive design? There are definitions on the internet that talks about the methodology and process and things of that nature. The way I like to describe inclusive design is that it's design that considers the full range and intersectionality of human uniqueness and diversity of perspectives, abilities, backgrounds, with the intent to fulfill as many needs as possible and drive innovation that really unlocks equitable, accessible, ethical, and valuable experiences for as many people as possible. It's really critical to understand It's the as many needs as possible and as many people as possible. It's a mindset. It's an attitude. And inclusive design is not restricted to interfaces or technologies of the product and services. We should be thinking inclusively throughout the entire process when we're thinking about building it from the go-to-market strategy, from the interception of the whole idea itself. So inclusive design is really about making sure that we are being intentional in our approach in design. So some of the myths that often I hear that I want to dismiss is that inclusive design does not imply that one product will fit all. In fact, oftentimes you'll hear the notion of one product fits one. And then we're placing the need for, it doesn't replace the need for specialist products and services. As I said, we're going to be trying within a product, and it's unreasonable for us to really expect a product to address the array of diversity. And then finally, only design products for a particular capability of loss. And so these are things that I wanted to demystify as it relates to inclusive design. Some of the key outcomes of inclusive design, it really allows to inspire new creative solutions. And the reason for this is because it allows us to really design for those edge cases that brings on and stimulates creativity. It expands within the primary market as well as accessing new markets. So it allows us to retain as well as attract new users. And then finally, it minimizes that risk of excluding or alienating any markets or causing unintentional harm. So why is it important? I think this is really a great question. So I'll go over to some stats real quick. So 80% of the world population is Black, Asian, Brown, dual heritage, or indigenous to the global South, creating a full global majority. In addition, we have women. Global consumer spending is 31.8 trillion. And then the next slide will let us know that we have global LGBTQ community has 3.6 trillion in buying power, and people with disabilities control 13 trillion in discretionary fund. And what this is telling us is that people who are using our products, whether physical or digital, are from a wide variety of backgrounds and diverse experiences. And these experiences impact the way they show up in the world and interact with our products. And so consumers are wanting to work with and align themselves with companies, brands, and products that share the same social, political, and moral values, and really diversify in showing their identities. And so with that in mind, when we think of how do we design our experiences, inclusive design experiences, we're looking at designs that are usable, allowing us to address the cognitive behavior and how we achieve those goals effectively and efficiently. We're looking at the accessible design and focusing on designing for people with diverse disabilities. We're looking at ethical, really addressing human rights, privacy, sustainability. And then, of course, equitable, really understanding all the diverse identities, race, gender, ethnicity, social economic status, just to name a few. And so foundationally, you'll see many principles out there on inclusive design, but some of these are just some of my favorites that have come up. 3 of them come from Kate Holmes, who is a great author, started at Microsoft, is currently, I think, at Salesforce, and wrote a book about called Mismatch. So the first one I want us to look at is design for reflection and belonging. Really being introspective in our thinking and really thinking about how do we make sure our products are inspiring those to belong and feel accepted, respected, and valued. The next one is understanding our social systems and historical context. When you think about this, it's just sometimes as designers, we go right in and try to design a solution, where the reality is that we really need to stop and think, what is the historical context? What are the larger things at play that we should be considering? The next one is seek out points of exclusion. Really thinking about how do we bring ourselves to the table, what biases we bring, identifying what assumptions we're making, and challenging our biases. And then the next one is learn from human and business diversity. And I added the word business because oftentimes we need to also think about the differences within businesses. And this is really about co-designing, bringing the voices to the table, really not replacing empathy with lived experience, uplifting the lived experience. And finally, solving for one and extending to many. This really comes from an example of the curb cut. If you think about the curb cut effect, which is where the curb cut was designed for wheelchairs. However, it allows and expands to across, allowing people to use strollers, dollies. Another example is the chosen name on your debit or credit card. This was initially designed for the LGBTQ plus community, but it also works for someone like me who can go by Shadeequa or D, and it allows me to. So again, another example of solving for one and allowing us to expand to many. And that is all I have for today. The next person on queue is Sarah, who will be talking about one of the most critical parts of inclusive design, inclusive research. Thank you so much, Lacey.
Thank you so much, Dee, for that information. And I love how you put some examples that in real life that designers sometimes think, oh, this is just for this audience or this niche, but it serves to everybody. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for showing us how to integrate inclusive design principles into our work. So now don't go away, Dee, because we have some questions for you at the final. But now our next step, let's hear from Sarrah on inclusive research. Sarrah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lacey. Before I start, I just want to say I hope you all were paying attention and taking notes because Dee dropped some real gems right there. So thank you, Dee. But inclusive research. So I like to define inclusive research as the act of collaborating with people from different identities and demographics to challenge the assumption that everyone interacts and experiences products and things in the same exact way. Because let's be honest, we don't. So as Dee previously mentioned, if you can go to the next slide, Lacey. Thank you. So as Dee previously mentioned, there's so many different identities and demographics, and we oftentimes overlook them. There's age, there's economic class, there's race, there's religion, there's sexual orientation. And when we don't consciously make it a goal to collaborate with diverse people, we end up defaulting to the homogenous user, and our research becomes unintentionally biased. One thing we should note is that we should always be cognizant of the intersectionality of these identities and how multiple identities can impact one's experiences. And by intersectionality, I'm talking about a person with different identities. So for example, a white mother. Being white gives her the privilege in today's society to advance her education, for example. But being a mother, presents a lot of barriers, whether it be like having to juggle taking care of her kids and work, or not being able to get that next promotion. So that's an example of intersectionality of the different identities. And then another one is I'm a Black Muslim woman. Where should I start? I'm just kidding. They're all beautiful identities. So a lot of people make assumptions about me, my identity, my ability, and that impacts the opportunities I have. So when we are conducting research, we should always try to recruit people with different identities and be aware of those the intersectionality of these identities, and include those people in our research, in our user interviews, in our usability testing. And that brings me to my next point, why inclusive research is so important. Because collaborating with people of diverse backgrounds and inviting the perspectives of communities that have been historically excluded and marginalized uncovers a lot of existing exclusions, and it makes us realize that we have biases, and it uncovers those biases. And conducting inclusive research gives us the opportunity to design products and experiences that uplift and empower people. And that's the whole purpose of what we're doing, we want to do that. And so when we don't conduct inclusive research and give people the opportunity to voice their needs, pain points, and their perspectives, we end up designing products and experiences that exclude people. And so there are real life examples of those. For example, there are cameras and filters that might have biases in color rendering of skin tones. And that's probably because usability testings were done with the homogeneous user. In this case, most likely white and light-skinned individuals. Another example can be like an app that may be built with connectivity requirements. So for example, when I go to Sudan, it's in East Africa, a lot of times I can't go on Zoom calls because I get booted out. So not being able to have that bandwidth prevents me and all the individuals who live in those places from accessing those applications. So that's why it's really important to include diverse perspectives within our research. And that brings me to the point that whether we like it or not, everything around us works the exact way we designed it to. Whether it's like an application or our educational system, everything's working the way we designed it. And that's why it's really important to have diverse perspectives in our research, to conduct the research for those experiences and those products that we're creating. And then, so inclusive research not only benefits the community, it also benefits businesses. I mean, who doesn't want to increase their profit or be more competitive by coming up with innovative solutions? Because having those different perspectives allows us to think outside of the box that we have around for ourselves, realize that there are other perspectives, other people out there that we don't necessarily know their experiences, so we actually need to listen to them. It allows us to expand our reach more consumers, more people, and it allows us to think about who, rather than who our users are, who I can't talk today, but that's fine. Instead of thinking about who our users are, we're thinking about who our users could be. And that's the most important part of like inclusive research. And I just want to leave everyone with a couple of tips on how to conducting inclusive research. So one of the important things is to think and implement inclusive research early and often, because it's easier to start with inclusive research than have it as an add-on at the end, or having to redesign a whole application from the beginning after you've released it. Another thing is collaborating with people from diverse and underrepresented communities, and make sure you're accommodating their needs when you're conducting your usability testing, your user interviews, and make sure you're working and designing with them rather than for them, because we don't know. They know best what they need, and we need to listen to them and amplify their needs and advocate for them within our products, within our organization, and within our teams. And then last but not least, we need to hire diverse employees, because we should be working in an environment that reflects the world we live in. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for all that information. It has been really valuable. I feel really connected with some of the things that you mentioned. In my case specifically, I'm a Latina, part of the LGBT community. I'm a woman, a little bit of intersectionality there. So, well, now that everybody has the context of the topic today and learn a little bit from you guys, I want to actually have the conversation with both and talk about some of the important questions that I'm sure other designers might have as well. So let's start with this one. Please give us an example, basically, of a project that you worked before when you apply your knowledge of inclusive design and change the outcome of the project. Let's start from D.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Lacey, and great job, Sarah, on explaining inclusive research. So I want to talk about a story that's kind of personal to me, in the sense that I've been doing this work for a while, doing science and technology and society. And in particularly at this time, I was with my grandmother. My grandmother had type 2 diabetes. And I was actually watching her try to use her blood glucose monitor. And I noticed she had difficulties using it. And so this like encouraged me to want to dive in more and learn more about type 2 diabetes. And so there was sufficient evidence that the blood glucose monitors were not easy to use. And although there was culturally starting to be more culturally centered diabetes education program, nothing was really looking at the use of this blood glucose monitor is supposed to help in managing their blood glucose and technology and relationships between it, and particularly ethnicity and the usability. And so I had the honor and privilege working with some great participants where I was able to conduct research on how the usability of blood glucose may vary between European Americans and African Americans, looking at two product interactive focus groups. So I had about 5 European Americans that self-identified and then 4 self-identified African Americans. And they used 2 blood glucose monitors and compared them across 3 critical tasks of what the blood glucose monitor. And the results indicated that ethnicity may have been a significant factor. Even in the conversations of speaking with those that were African American, they don't call it blood glucose, they call it sugar. So just having that inclusive language, they didn't understand the numbers and what was actually on there. And so I was also looking at it from an aging perspective, and that's why I went with older adults in this group, and just trying to understand how we could make the changes. And so using that information, we were able to provide some guidelines back to these companies as it relates to how to design a more inclusive blood glucose monitor. So that's an example.
I will say that in your case specifically, like design is saving lives, definitely.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that example with us. I am seeing some questions also on the chat. People, thank you so much for sharing those. At the final of this panel, we will share some of those if we have a little bit more time. Now we'd love to actually know an example from Sarrah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dee. I actually a couple days ago saw an article on LinkedIn about it. So what are the odds? But at the beginning of the pandemic, I was working on a project that helped parents stay connected with their kids when they're at work. We interviewed mothers that were working from home, and then mothers working in the hospital, and also working fathers. So when we were doing the interviews, we were cognizant of their different identities and how those identities impacted their parenting experiences during COVID. So that was a really important part of our research, because we went into the research assuming that all of them would have similar experiences, but as we were conducting the research, we realized that they struggle with different things, but one thing in common is juggling work and then checking in with their kids, and also self-care. And for the aspect of self-care, we didn't realize that until we were actually conducting those interviews and talking to parents. That was something that came up afterwards. We ended up, after doing our research, we ended up focusing on an essential worker. She's a single mother of 3 kids who works 12 plus hours. And a lot of the solutions that we came up for her use case, we were able to translate or translate to other parents' experiences. So she was I guess we can quote unquote put edge case in our research. And we're like, okay, that's the person who needs it a lot. That's something, she struggles with it. And as we were designing for her, we were able to extend that solution to the other parents who were also experiencing difficulties with parenting during the pandemic. So that's an example of, I guess, designing for one and extending to many right there.
No, thank you so much, Sarah. Actually, I can add to that, like designers, sometimes we assume things, right? And
yes.
and we can assume like everybody that is a parent is just like a single mother or just a mother, right? And actually taking in consideration this diversity and this type of inclusion help us to actually expand a little bit or horizontals, right?
Yeah.
So now this is one of the questions that I really like. It's not because I really want to do mistakes every time. It's just I want to learn from my mistakes. So I would love to hear what is the most common mistake in the design when we talk about inclusive design and what we can do to avoid that, right? Dee, can you start with us?
Yeah, so I think there's many common mistakes, and it's because it's still something new that companies are bringing in. So we're learning, and I want everybody to understand that inclusion is a journey, right? And so because humans are always evolving, you're going to have to always continuously learn. So just keep that in mind when I'm speaking about these mistakes. One of the mistakes that I think, and you just alluded to, so it's really great, is that calling out our own personal biases, right? Truly addressing that as a team, that how we're coming to the table, how we're showing up has an impact on anything we design. And so I think that's really critical, and really understanding that our design decisions can include or exclude. So that's critical. And saying that how to resolve that, having these exercises. One of the exercises I use is something that I've developed with this company, this nonprofit called Measure, and it's called Core Biases, and it's called Core Values and Biases. So we're not only saying, what are our biases and how we're going to address it at the beginning of the project, but also talking about what our core values are, because that helps us understand the lens and possible bias that you're actually talking and thinking about things as well. Another one that I think is really, really important is defining the problem from that community's perspective. So we often make the assumption and come and say that this is a problem, but we really don't know if that's really the problem. And so we really need to be careful about taking that approach and really understand. And that's why it's so important to co-design, right? And use those participatory methods that allow us to get an understanding and discover what really is the problem and the root cause that we're really trying to solve, and not the symptoms. And then finally, I think just starting from a historical perspective, it goes back to one of my principles of really understanding that historical context and what the larger forces at play. We're designing, but are we thinking about the digital inclusion? To Sarah's point about technology and having that access, so really just being inclusive from that. And I have one more, and I would be remiss if I don't bring this up because my background is in engineering. Not thinking that your data or your AI model is biased. And oftentimes I hear it because it doesn't include identity data. Please know that there's proxy attributes that often strongly correlate to identity data, such as race and gender. And so if you think about it, for example, zip code may be a proxy for race. Yeah. And so really testing and finding your bias and making sure that your data models, as we are in this data filled world, are not biased is really critical. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dee. I feel really connected with you. I've been in some projects in my past experience when designers really want to just solve a problem that they think that is the problem, and that is just part of the symptom, right? And when you ask people, when you ask to your users, you notice that the problem is maybe not that big because you need to ask. So yeah, I would say people just ask, don't assume. That's my 2 cents for today. So Sarah, can you share some examples from your experience?
Yeah, before I do that, I just wanted to say your whole zip code and the data. We're currently looking for houses, and a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, no, that area is a bad area." I'm like, let's unpack that, So yes, there are a lot of biases when it comes to if you're looking up on crime mapping, if you're looking up the certain zip code, a lot of things we don't know the context, and there's a lot of biases when it comes to that. So
absolutely.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that are really common is that assuming that inclusive design means accessibility. And a lot of times we're like, okay, our product is inclusive because our color contrast is great, our typography, and all of that. And that's not what inclusive design is. Inclusive design is about the process and the tools, not necessarily just accessibility. Accessibility is part of it. Accessibility, I see as is a result of inclusive design, inclusive research. So that's one of the things that I'd say is a common mistake.
I agree 100%. The people that know me before, I know that not the 200 that are here, know that I'm an accessibility advocate, and that's something that actually I see a lot. Companies that just assume that because they pass the automatically test that is not enough. People, they are think that are good to go. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that one. Definitely, definitely. Now, another thing that I want to actually ask you guys is the term about, like, companies want to make money, and we want to actually give the companies that we are work on like a great things to actually towards to the products and the services. So how we can introduce the inclusive design practice in our work considering company goals? This is a hard question, but I know that a lot of designers want to know about it. Sarah, can you start with that one?
Yeah, so I think there are multiple things that can be done. One is probably hiring diverse demographic of employees, because a lot of times when we're conducting research, from experience, we don't have access to end users that we can talk to, and we end up talking to people within the organization. So being able to hire people from different walks of life really helps us when we're conducting our research, our usability testings. It helps uncover our biases. Um, Another thing is the language and the language that's being used, the words, the the culture, and within teams within the organization. That's something that can be like a small thing that we can work on, making sure that everyone feels like they belong within the team, within the organization, and feels comfortable voicing their opinion. So I think it starts with the culture, really.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that information. Definitely. Dee, what is about you? Tell us.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is just like making sure you understand what your company DEI strategy is, and looking at how you can align from that perspective in itself. Again, it's like inclusive design is not restricted just to the products. It should be embedded across the company in everything that we do, right? And so in doing that, that means you may need to bring the company on a journey of awareness and education. And so that's really critical. Something that I'm doing currently at Visa is doing those like road shows where I'm going around speaking to different teams and really developing examples so they can resonate on based on the products that they are focusing on. I think building in bias checks and embedding bias busters in your process. So, Sarah talks about the whole process. And so when you're looking at your complete and end-to-end design and development process, where can bias creep up? Think about that and start thinking about how do you address it and allow that. Add simple things is add inclusion questions to your retros for those that are using Agile. Really having that added to and just to do a reflection. Um, Jacqueline Amana at Uber actually developed this inclusive reflection prompts that you can do at each step, just asking those quick inclusion questions. And so those are ways that I think you can start bringing in. I think expanding your recruitment pool, thinking about how you work with partners are really good ways to help diversify your research participants.
Thank you, Dee. Taking your point about knowing the goals of your company. I've been in some companies that actually doesn't know anything about accessibility. That's my basically my part of the design things that I do. And I try to educate them, not only because this is good to know to do, because sometimes companies, that's not the way to actually convince them, right? Because they have some benefits also there. Sometimes I hear people that say, like, you are the devil of accessibility, you sell the accessibility, right? Because I really want that everybody feels that accessibility is tangible and it's something that you can apply really easily. So taking to your point that actually know the goals of your company, educate your company too, right? Using those goals and educate your coworkers, your managers, and actually talk about inclusivity, talking about all the things that they need to know in order to actually apply in the entire design process. So yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that one. Now I really want to know before we go and we go to actually the questions that the public, the audience have for us. That actually the chat is on fire. So prepare, G and Sarah. Let me tell you. So any thoughts for our audience before we end about this amazing talk about inclusive design? Let's start with D.
So I think one, there is a book that actually recently came out. It's called Designing for Belonging, How to Build Inclusion and Collaboration in Your Communities. It's by not Sarah, sorry, Susie Wise. And so that book literally just came out like April of this year. And so I think that's a good reference to start looking at. I think we need to be intentional about expanding beyond that average users, because average users don't exist anymore, and edge cases will bring the innovation. And so that is critical to think about it that way. It's the 20% that we should really be looking at. I think we also need to be intentional about thinking about intent versus impact. And so, do we want to be first to the market, or do we want high levels of market penetration and adoption of our product? And those are two different questions. And it really is about the impact that we should be focusing on. Finally, I really recommend that people start looking in their companies and identifying inclusive design advocates or ambassadors, building up that program. Ensure every team includes people trained to identify and ask about inclusion is really critical. And so the final thing I want to say, I guess, is, you're not the user. And in the end, that this is anybody who's ever seen me present or do workshops, I have to remind people, you are not the users. So bring the users to the table and allow them to design with you. Thank you.
Now I want a shirt with "I'm not the user."
And I got the shirt. I got it. I said, stakeholder advisory, you're not the user. I will let you know where you can get that shirt.
I want one now, D.
I will.
It's recorded. Okay, so Sarah,
I love that.
Can you share with us your thoughts about this amazing talk and any advice for the audience?
Yeah. So first thing is that you can't get there overnight. Like, we're all learning, and we're all learning and learning new things every day. So make sure that you have a plan set in place, that between wanting to do it and doing it, you got to bridge that gap with like a plan, so we can chip at it one thing at a time. And another thing I'd recommend is, if you want to expand your knowledge on inclusive design, there are two books that I'm currently reading. Mismatched by Kat Holmes. I believe G, you mentioned that earlier. And then Building for Everyone. It's a book by Annie John Baptiste. And she's a designer, or she works at Google right now. But those two books have been really helpful for me. So those are two things.
Thank you so much. I know some of the people from my team will be addressing those books, so we have that on the chat. So people, if you want to actually connect with Dee and Sarah, they are QR code, so you can actually connect with them through LinkedIn. Now we will pass to the chat of the questions. Again, Dee and Sarah, this is spicy. We have a lot of questions, so are you guys prepared? I don't know. So first question, what are your favorite tools and frameworks for conducting UX inclusive research? Also, who are the UX research inclusive researcher thought leaders? I don't know who wants to go first. I can put it also over
Yeah, be
here.
Sarah. It's on
Oh,
research.
Sarah.
So, Sarah, you want to take it first? It's on research.
I will.
I'm reading the question. Sorry, I missed that.
Don't worry, I can read it again. What are your favorite tools and frameworks for conducting UX inclusive research?
Okay, so probably for that, for tools, since it's we do a lot of virtual virtual interviews and virtual research. Zoom, we use Zoom a lot, and we like to send out, for example, the agenda and the questions and what the users should be expecting, or the participants would be expecting during the session. So giving them a heads up, giving them that brief, also being understanding if they need any help, or if they need any assistance, any accommodation beforehand, so we're prepared for that. Those are probably the two things that are really important. And then I do tend to lean towards virtual or like Zoom virtual interviews and research, because a lot of times you can reach more people that way, because we only know the people within our community, right? So those are the two things that I'd say have been helpful.
Thank you so much. Dee, what are your favorite tools and frameworks?
So I don't know if there's any favorite real, I mean, depends on what I think when I think of inclusive research, it's really about making sure the environment that you're using, regardless of the tool, is inclusive, right? And that's how. So I'm gonna say I don't really have a favorite. There are tips on how you can make it inclusive. So I think Sarah hit on, hey, making sure we check what are the accessibility needs, or what I would say, even in inclusive research, oftentimes when you're using Zoom, you assume that the person's going to be able to show video. Don't assume that. Yes. Provide a way to just call. So these are the things that you have to. It's like providing that environment that's inclusive. Making sure, I think one of the things about research, and this is something that I've been toying with and trying to really think about a little more, is sometimes you're going to be talking about topics that are traumatic to the people. So you have to be careful in how you ask the questions. You have to, it's the instructions that you give during when you're talking to a marginalized, traditionally excluded group, that you have to be really thinking about and considerate of, letting them know, hey, I may bring up a topic. If I do, you can say pass. Or if I do, you can take time away. Pay attention to your body. We can take some breathers. It's how you're doing the research that really changes and making it more inclusive. I hope that's helpful for everyone.
It is. It is a lot. Thank you so much. So we have another one, and for me, this is really important one. I know if the product doesn't, if the product doesn't need to, let me over here. Sorry, it goes upper. Okay, if your team is not as a diverse and your product research consists of data only, so user testing is not possible in this current stage, what other techniques can you apply to increase inclusivity?
Oh, so we're saying that the data it's only data that you have currently, and you can't do any user testing or research, any type of research right now. So I think here's the thing, your product team may not be diverse. And when you say product team, it depends on how you're defining product team. So I expand the definition of product team. Anybody who works with me or have ever been working with me, it knows that I include the salespeople. So I start looking for diversity on the extended team of products to see if I can bring them in for voices. I also, looked out into the internet, seeing if there's other research that can help that's already been done with this particular community. And I start there. Of course, I want inclusion to be done as early as possible. It needs to be done. It should not be done at the end. But if you notice that there's a phase that you're not able to, and that's why I like that prompting, because each question prompts you to say, who are you missing? And who do you, or who are possibly harming? And you're able to say, okay, can I bring them into the next stage? So it's not a one time and done. Inclusivity to me is always building throughout the process and bringing different voices in. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Dee. Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Um, I don't have anything to add. I think Dee hit
They
all
hit
points
the
right
home
there.
run.
Yes, making sure that it's not just the product team. There's so many people in your company and outside of your direct team that you can bring in. And I think for me, sales has been really helpful because they're the ones who are a lot of time in direct contact with customers. So they have an interesting perspective on things. But yeah, that's probably what I have to say about that.
You finally add some of the home run of D. Okay. We have another one here. How can we start incorporating some of this thinking into organization? And I think I basically talk a little bit of that. Trying to educate your organization about the topic. Sometimes it's just like a small conversation, and you put the seed over there, and the curiosity of your manager, of your coworkers, that actually need to start like learning from the topic. I mean, that's from my side. What about you, Dee and Sarah?
Yeah, I think it just goes back. I think you're absolutely right. It's about the awareness and education. I think it's really critical, and what I found has been successful is that I think about not when after understanding what our DEI strategy is, really looking at our internal policies and systems and things of that nature, and finding tangible examples of where inclusion could be impactful, or just helping people reframe the question and problem, and work from there. So that's what I've been doing, in addition to just educating, showing the benefits, finding articles, really doing some desk research and seeing what you can find to help make it applicable to your actual company and what it's doing.
Yeah. What I'd add to that or expand on that would be really, you need to show them rather than just telling them. You need to show them examples. You need to show them projects you've worked on. You need to show them the impact and how that would improve their organization or their team, their reach, like the impact that they'd have on how it would make them more competitive and how it would make their products more competitive, and show them like concrete proof that that's happened,
I think that's really good. I think you touched on reach. So when you're thinking about from a business perspective, oftentimes as a product team, you're asked to say do your TAM SAM sum, which is like looking at your total addressable and then really who you're going to be able to serve. And if you're able to use what your examples are that you find, or data that you find on how you can expand the reach, that total addressable market becomes so small, but you serve so many. And I think it's critical to show those numbers. That helps explain the return on investment.
This is actually the same when I say selling the accessibility or selling the inclusive design. It's basically that, right? So showing some examples that people are convinced after that. I have a question here that for me is really important, and I think Dee and I discussed it previously. The question is, I know if the product doesn't need to know gender, it should not be asked. But if it is required, what is the best approach? If it's the best, ask what gender were you born as, or what gender do you identify as, or what are the most inclusive selection options?
Whew.
What a question, right?
I wasn't ready. Yeah, I was not ready. So it depends. What I typically do, and what I typically advise, and this is just off the top of my head right now, but it's this is for all demographic questions. One of my biggest pet peeves is someone saying that they're doing inclusive design research, or they're doing inclusive research, and their questions that they include in their screener are radio buttons. They like, people should be able to show up how they want, as fluid as they want. So one of the things I do say is remove other, include an option to write in self-describe, include an option to say prefer not to say. And then as it relates to the other options, it all depends. But I normally either you say man, woman, non-binary, or gender fluid, or I do. And what you need to do is make sure the most excluded group is typically at the top. So there's like real like rules around this. Like I have developed like a document. So if you reach out to me, I can share that document. But what I'm trying to say is that, so you would say trans woman, trans man, non-binary, you would go backwards and then say cis woman, cisgender. It just depends on how you want to do it. But the main thing is allowing people to actually self-describe themselves and have the option not to answer, and have the option to check as many as they want, are really critical in providing those rules.
Thank you so
Hope
much
that's
for
helpful.
that. It is. It is. I struggle with that a lot. I mean, in my country, in Puerto Rico, like when we have to fill it out some documentation, it says like white, Asian, or like what is the other one? Caucasian, I think is the other one. But sometimes we want to mark that we are like a mix or we are Latinos, and we don't have those options, and it's
Yeah.
just crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and I think but that's the thing. I want you, like, the one thing is expand it. So it's really hard to say this because this is something even on the team that at Visa we've had this discussion. How many options? Because there's rules from a survey perspective of options anxiety, right? So you can provide too many choices, but you should try to be as inclusive as possible to the market that you are researching with. And then that, I think that's critical to keep in mind when you're developing those questions.
Thank you so much. So we have five more minutes. We have another question over here, and I think this one will be for Sarah. When you are doing research and have included unrepresented identities perspectives, those perspectives may not be represented in majority numbers. How do you then make sure those voices are heard?
Okay, can you repeat that again? Sorry.
Sure. So when you are doing research and have included unrepresented identities perspectives, those perspectives may not be represented in majority numbers. How do you then make sure those voices are heard?
I think so when you do include those, I think it's a smart way to preface that, hey, these are the information that we have, and you still represent that. So that information should still be represented when you're presenting to your team, to your stakeholders. I think you should still represent those experiences, because as we were previously saying, those edge cases are what lead us to create more innovative solutions, and we can't like fall to the default user always. And a lot of times those underrepresented communities aren't the majority number because we don't necessarily have, or we're not interviewing them, but they do make up a big portion of our communities, of our world, of the world. So I think we should still mention that, hey, this is this edge case, and this is how solving for this specific case can help other people too. So show how that solution can be magnified and how it can impact other people. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. I think yes. And if not, please, people, take the advantage that those QR codes are there. Scan it and contact Dr. Shadeequa D. Miller and Sarrah Solomon through LinkedIn. And now I just want to thank you both so much for sharing the knowledge with us and with our audience. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. We are super excited and could be happier to continue with more sessions. This is only the first one, people. So stay tuned. We will put more there. Thank you so much for the opportunity to sharing this knowledge with everyone. Thank you, Dee. Thank you, Sarah.